Why would they make you stand next to guys that are 6'8" and above? That doesn't make any sense.
I know.
It's not. I'm like, put it behind. Let's let these guys sit down. Welcome to ESPN's 2022 NBA Draft Primer. I'm Christine Williamson, and joining me to break down everything from the NBA Draft Lottery are ESPN Draft experts Jonathan Givony and Mike Schmitz, and ESPN front office insider Bobby Marks. So the 2022 NBA Draft Lottery just ended. It's in Chicago. You guys are all in Chicago. The slots are official. The Magic are taking the number 1 overall pick. So let's just start talking about what happened with the lottery. And Bobby, I'm going to start with you. Which teams do you view as the big winners based on the way everything shook out on Tuesday night?
I mean, I think the easy answer would be Orlando, certainly when you get the number 1 pick, but I think it's Oklahoma City when you jump from 4 to 2. And now you've got, either Jabari Smith or Chet Holmgren basically staring at you. That's a nice consolation prize. And I think there was some separation there from the top 3 to where the Thunder were at. We're at number 4. And I think probably second place has to be Sacramento, right? Jumping all the way up until the top 4 where they were. They need a lot of help. And I think getting into that top 4 is certainly a start.
Mike?
Yeah, I think I would say Sacramento is, aside from the obvious, because we talk so much about this being a 3-player draft at the top. And, there's these big 3 when you look at Holmgren and Smith and Banchero. But I think there's an argument to be made that there's 4 really good players. It reminds me a little bit of last year when, we talked so much about Cade Cunningham and Jalen Green and Evan Mobley, which we should have, but Scotty Barnes, looking back, clearly deserved to be in that conversation. And that's kind of how I feel about Keegan Murray in this draft. This is a guy who was arguably the best player in all of college basketball, averaged 24 points a game, incredibly efficient, great person, worker, all those things. And he plays arguably the most coveted position in the NBA at that kind of combo forward spot. So I think it's a huge win for Sacramento to move up, be able to draft a guy like either Keegan Murray, Jaden Ivey, Shaedon Sharpe, are really, really talented. Orlando, obviously, that's huge, but Sacramento, I think they needed this in a big way.
So just to clarify, Orlando is number 1, Oklahoma City at number 2, Houston at number 3, and Sacramento at number 4. And Mike, you kind of got ahead in the rundown, but we're going to talk about Keegan Murray a little bit more later. Let's go to Jonathan for a little bit. Which teams do you feel like came away the most disappointed from everything that happened on Tuesday night?
I would say Detroit, having the season that they had, just some misery that their fan base went through, and falling from 3 to 5, it's a big drop off in this draft. I mean, I still think there's going to be a good player there for them, but I think their fan base has got to be pretty disappointed right now. So I think, I also think that Indiana, also took a bit of a tumble from, to 6. And, once you get into that 6 through 10 range, there really is no clear-cut guy. So I think there is a big drop off for them. And I saw their front office huddling outside the lottery draft room, and they looked very, very disappointed. So you could see that they've got some big decisions to make here with which direction they go with this pick.
Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's an obvious one, that Givony outlined there. The Pistons are the one to me that I would be most disappointed. I mean, you have a little bit of a tough year, obviously showed some signs of growth. I think they have a bright future when you look at Cade Cunningham and Sadiq Bey and, Isaiah Stewart, and they had some really impressive moments, but man, it would have been ideal to pair Cade Cunningham with either Jabari Smith or Chet Holmgren. Like that, to me, that fit was just perfect with either of those guys, particularly Holmgren. So now you're looking at it and you can still get a good player, but is Jaden Ivey the direction you want to go and put this dynamic guard next to Cade? There's good options again, but I think that a guy like Holmgren or a guy like Jabari Smith could have really taken them from this kind of exciting young team with good pieces to, a team in the Eastern Conference that people are going to force to be reckoned with, down the line. So that's a tough one for them to swallow, I think.
And you mentioned Jabari and Chet because the conversation is who is going to be taken number 1 overall. I actually loved watching you at the draft lottery, Mike, because why would they make you stand next to guys that are 6'8" and above? That doesn't make any sense.
I know.
It's not. I'm like, put it behind. Let's let these guys sit down. It's ridiculous.
That's what I'm saying. And then they brought over David Robinson. He's 7'1".
I'm
like,
he came in, I was like, this is just ruining everything.
I had to defend my height. I'm 6'2". Unbelievable.
I know you're an average tall guy, but those guys are just ridiculous. So when we talk about the number 1 overall pick, obviously a huge conversation has been about Chet being number 1 overall, and you mentioned Jabari as well. Who do you think, now that the lottery has played out and we know that Orlando is going number 1 overall, who do you think will go number 1 as the draft pick?
Yeah, I think it's hard for me to say what exactly they're going to do. You know, I don't have a perfect pulse on like, yeah, they're for sure going to take this guy or this guy. I think a lot of these teams are still trying to figure that out. To be honest, I don't think at this point anyone's like, oh, for sure, this is our guy. You still need to bring him into your gym, sit down with him, get to know him a little bit. You know, you've been watching him obviously, but build that personal connection. If it were me, I'm taking Chet. I really, really like Jabari Smith. I like some of the things he brings as a shooter, as a defender. I just think Chet is a type of guy who can change a franchise. It's, you know, Jonathan and I both scan the globe looking for these type of guys, like guys who are 7 feet tall with a 7'6" wingspan and who block everything, shoot threes, and can handle and bring that versatility. So again, if it were me, I'm taking Chet. It's hard for me to say which direction they're going to go.
Jonathan, do you agree?
Yeah, I agree. I definitely would take Chet personally, but I think it's going to be a really tough conversation in their front office. And also I think the coaching staff is going to have a lot of say in that too. I'm betting the coaching staff is going to say Jabari Smith. And I think the front office is probably right now split, you know, just so I have Jabari Smith number 1 in my mock draft, just because I know the way that they value shooting, length, you know, that defensive versatility, the high energy. I actually was with the Orlando Magic at one of Jabari's best games. And so, you know, I saw the reaction. They were very excited about him. But also, I know that they went to some of Chet's best games, you know, so it's a great position to be in. I'm sure that they're going to bring both guys in. They put a big emphasis on the interview, on meeting the player, getting to know him, understanding what makes him tick. And they're going to try and figure out not just which player is going to be the best talent, but also what is the best fit, because they have a lot of really intriguing pieces already on their team with Franz Wagner and Jalen Suggs and Cole Anthony, not to mention Jonathan Isaac and Markelle Fultz. And they really, really need shooting. So I'm leaning to Jabari right now, but and also I think if you're talking about Wendell Carter and Mo Bamba, if you still value those guys, you probably look at Jabari. I would take Chet, but I think it's 60-40 right now.
One thing that I'm curious to see is just how Chet gains weight, because he's going to have to do that at the next level. And I'm just curious, because I mean, the dude's pretty skinny, 195 pounds. I feel like he's going to be tumbling with some big guys in the NBA. Bobby, I'll go to you. How do you feel like the rest of the top 3 will play out on June 23rd?
Well, I mean, I think you're probably looking at all bigs. I think it's just a matter of I think, you know, Paolo probably you're looking at maybe at 3, where Houston is. And I think it's probably a coin flip for the top 2, you know, at 1 and 2 there. So I don't think, you know, maybe Jaden Ivey maybe creeps in there potentially. I mean, we had, you know, certainly Scotty Barnes outside of, you know, where his projection was last year. And we saw him jump up there and Toronto grab him there. So I think right now you're probably staring at all bigs with the top 3, but with the potential of maybe Ivy jumping in there.
Jonathan, any thoughts?
Yeah, you know, I think it's going to be all bigs. I actually have Keegan Murray going 4th to Sacramento. I just think Houston, you know, they have a couple of bigs there in Şengün and Christian Wood. So maybe they do say, hey, let's draft Jaden Ivey and make this the most athletic backcourt in the NBA and maybe in NBA history. I mean, there's two are, incredibly explosive. But I think the having a guy like Paolo, I mean, they may have drafted him number one because they really need a guy that can shoulder a big offensive load, that can create a lot of shots, that can create shots for others. And Paolo he's a 6'10" guard. He's a guy that can play pick and roll. He can go get his own shot. He's incredible pushing off the defensive glass. And so, not having a real point guard in Houston like they do now, you get a Paolo Banchero, and that alleviates some of that. So I think, even though they probably would have liked to move up to one, I think they'll be feeling still pretty good. I think any of those three guys, the three bigs, are a good fit in Houston.
Okay, let's move on the conversation to teams, because there are 4 teams with multiple first-round picks in the draft this year. That's the Rockets, the Spurs, the Grizzlies, the OKC Thunder. So, Bobby, I'm going to start with you. Which of those teams do you feel like has the most stake in this draft?
I think it's the Thunder again. I mean, when you have 2 lottery picks at 2 and 12, the second from the Paul George trade, and you have a boatload of future draft assets, and I know they're kind of on their timeline as far as to build this. It's, not as aggressive as, maybe some other teams, and they've got the patience card, but I think you got to get it right in this draft. With both picks, the interesting thing will be, can you keep all 3, that pick, the 30th pick, which you've gotten from Phoenix in that Chris Paul trade. I would certainly think that will be in play. But for me, it's just Oklahoma City, just based on, the rarity of having a top 2 pick has not come their way very often. I mean, coming into tonight, they never even had the number 1 pick overall ever. So I do think it's Oklahoma City as far as those teams that, that have multiple picks.
Mike, I'm going to ask you this. Can any of those teams really transform themselves with this draft?
Yeah, I mean, to Bobby's point, Oklahoma City, I think to some degree, we saw a carousel of different lineups and a lot of different guys coming in playing minutes throughout the course of the season, but they have 2 really strong cornerstones when you look at Josh Giddey and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. So if you add a Chet Holmgren at number 2, say, or even Jabari Smith, then you have 3 potentially all-star caliber young players under the age of whatever it is, 23 or 24, 23 probably. And then at 12, I think you can still get a really good player too, whether you want to swing for the fences or you want to take a guy who's maybe a little bit more ready, to contribute. So, and then do they have 32?
30. Yeah.
Yeah.
From Phoenix. Yep.
So then you have 30 and you could maybe get another guy who's going to contribute. There's some real sleepers in this draft. I'm sure we'll maybe touch on that at some point, but there's some guys I think can help you right away also. So they're one I definitely think of. San Antonio, I'm interested to see just kind of like the direction that they go. They have a lot of young guys who are in that almost like 6'3" to 6'6", 6'7" type of range when it's, Devin Vassell and DeJounte Murray and, Kelvin Johnson and a lot of impressive young players in their own right, but how is it all going to come together? And so I'm interested to see if they can really kind of make that jump by hitting a few more singles here. But Oklahoma City obviously is going to be the talk of the draft in a lot of ways.
Knowing that and knowing where every team has now fallen in the NBA draft, who might be looking to trade out of their current position or trade up? Bobby, I'll ask you that.
I think Portland. I mean, I'm watching Damian Lillard on stage, and he gave a kind of a, chronology of what the roster looks like. And I'm waiting and I'm thinking those names sound okay, but they're not, besides Anthony Simons, they're not difference makers here. And I think with the 7th pick in the draft, they're on this accelerated rebuild. They're how does the rebuild and the timeline of Damian Lillard fit? And what does the pick number 7 do for Damian Lillard right now? And I think certainly that's going to be in play. And I think we'll probably hear about certainly with Detroit and this, flipping 7 for Jeremy Grant makes sense. The Trailblazers got this big trade exception at $21 million. But I think for me, I would probably circle Portland as probably having that pick and play.
Jonathan?
I think San Antonio is a team that probably needs to do something. They have 3 first-round picks, 9, 20, and 25. They need a star in the worst way. And, 9 traditionally is a spot that you draft. There's been some really good players drafted there, but I think if they could package those 3 picks, move up, maybe into the top 5, and they've got some really interesting young players, they need to figure out a way to get out of this cycle of mediocrity where they're competing for the play-in spot, the 9th and the 10th seed in the West. The West is so tough right now. They need a real difference maker on their roster, and I just don't see it. I mean, you have a great piece in DeJounte Murray, one of the best defenders in the NBA, but you need a real front court star. I mean, you need somebody that can shoulder a real heavy load and can go get you a shot late in the clock, and I just don't see that on their roster right now. So I could really envision them either taking some swings at 9, 20, 25, just, going straight upside, most talented player on the board, just try and draft the best player we can, or trying to package those picks and move up.
Okay, so the players that we talked about earlier are going into the draft combine. They're going to be showing their skills out there. Mike, I'm going to start with you on this one. Who's a player that you could see making a big move up the draft boards, even into the lottery over the next 5 weeks?
Ooh, into the lottery. That's a good one. Well, the player who teams are most enamored with right now, I think, is Shaedon Sharpe. Out of Kentucky. Didn't play any games at Kentucky, but was a highly touted recruit. Ended up doing a semester there. Didn't play, so nobody's really seen him play in like intense competition. He was up in Canada. I first saw him when he was like 14 or 15 at some, BioSteel Futures game. And really, I've only seen him at EYBL and Peach Jam and kind of like, competitive, but loosey-goosey a little bit. And teams were, blown away by his pro day yesterday. And so they're trying to figure out this 6'6" guard wing with a 7-foot wingspan. Like, what do we make of this guy who's a number 1 player in his high school class who could be like a number 1 pick type of guy at some point? So he's somebody you could see maybe even rising in the top 5 in terms of like at the combine here in the lottery. The guy I love is Jalen Williams out of Santa Clara. He's a 6'6" wing, 7'2" wingspan. He's one of the best players in the country this past year, averaged 18, 4 and 4 for Santa Clara. He's 21 years old. He's a super late bloomer. So in terms of like a guy maybe in the early second round right now who could work his way up into the teens, I think Jalen Williams is a name to look after.
Jonathan, what do you think?
I've got my eye on Malachi Branham from Ohio State. He is a freshman. He just turned 19 years old. Started the season really slow, came off the bench, didn't really have a big impact, but over the last 15 games of the season, really became the best player in the Big Ten, carried Ohio State into the NCAA tournament, had an awesome game to end the year against Villanova. Really is everything that the NBA is looking for in a wing. He can create his own shot. He's great in the mid-range. He's an outstanding 3-point shooter. He's got great tools defensively. I've heard some teams compare him to is this guy going to be like a DeMar DeRozan type, a guy who by his 4th or 5th year in the NBA really blossoms into an all-star. So he's got a pro day coming up tomorrow. I'm really interested to see how he looks. He was only just testing the waters a few weeks ago. He wasn't sure, where do I stand with teams? Am I even a 1st-round pick? And he's gotten some really good feedback to the point that teams in the top 10 are even starting to take a look at him. So he's got a pretty wide draft range, and, he's the guy that could really skyrocket in this process.
Okay, Mike, I'm going to ask you a question, but you cannot say Shaedon Sharpe.
Oh.
Who is the player that teams have the most questions about going into the draft process?
Oh, the most questions about is definitely Shaedon Sharpe, but it's okay. I jumped into that too early. So I think one guy teams are trying to figure out a little bit more is Ousmane Dieng. He's a 6'10" French wing, and they just haven't really seen him because he played this past year for the New Zealand Breakers in the Australian NBL. Like we've seen, LaMelo Ball play, a lot of RJ Hampton, and you couldn't travel there until I think mid to late February. Like scouts couldn't actually go watch him, I believe because of the quarantine, and it made it very difficult to evaluate him in competitive settings. I was able to go there, watch a couple games, watch a few practices, and get a good feel for him. But I think there's only a handful of like real decision makers that have seen him play. And when you talk about his talent, he's everything you want in today's game. Like he's a 6'10" wing. He can handle, he can pass, he can shoot it a little bit. He has defensive tools. He's incredibly young. So like on paper, he should be a top 10 talent. But somewhat similarly to Shaedon, there's not a huge body of work, more than Shaedon, but not a huge body of work to kind of evaluate him, and especially with in-person evaluations. So, and he's not going to be doing his pro day either out here in Chicago. So it's a very, very small sample size. And I think scouts and executives are trying to figure out, like, what is this guy and how high should we take him? Because he's a very tantalizing talent.
I'm glad that I gave that qualifier, because I was like, we already heard about Shaedon.
No, we're done. We're done with Shaedon Sharp. Sorry, Shaedon Sharp.
Since Mike already gave us his number 4 pick being Keegan Murray, I'm going to ask you this, Jonathan. Who's a player more like Scotty Barnes, who made an immediate impact for the Raptors, obviously was taken number 4 overall last year, and was the rookie of the year this season? So who's a guy like that in the draft that you're looking at?
I mean, I think Chet is going to be the rookie of the year. Honestly, I think there's a big drop off in this draft, after 1 and then after 2, I mean, I think Paolo will have a big opportunity to be rookie of the year, but I don't really see like the guys after that. We're talking about like AJ Griffin, Jalen Duren, Dyson Daniels, Johnny Davis, Ben Mathurin. These aren't rookie of the year type players. These are like really good pieces. These are guys that you are hoping, get better and better. And by their second and third year, they're starters and, they're helping you win games. And we say that every year, but you look at like the 2013 draft. I mean, it was like Giannis went 15 and Rudy Gobert went 27, and those are the 2 best players. So honestly, we don't know who the best players are going to be yet. I mean, I wish I could tell you. So that's why we have Chet, ranked number 1. I think that there's, we have a pretty firm grasp of what the top 3 is. And I would be surprised if, I think Keegan Murray, like Schmitz says, definitely has a chance because he was the best player in college basketball. I mean, he led the country in scoring for most of the year. He did it without a point guard, without any plays being run for him, so like that guy is going to get buckets in the NBA right away. Besides that, I think it's a lot of wait and see, honestly.
Okay. So I should have been more specific. Outside of the top 3, who do you think could make an impact like Scotty Barnes was able to do because he was outside of the top 3?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jaden Ivey, like Jaden Ivey physically is, he's a young Russell Westbrook. And if you put the ball in his hands and you let him go and you play really fast tempo, you let him play through his mistakes, that guy could give you 20 points. So I think that the NBA spacing is going to be really big for him. Just having a lot of shooting around him. And I think like a team like Detroit could be great for him. So, if he falls 0 to 5, I think Jaden Ivey will be in contention for rookie of the year.
Okay, Mike, players like Herb Jones, picked number 35 in the second round, huge for the Pels. Are there any players like that you feel like can kind of follow that blueprint?
Yeah, in terms of the style of player, I think Dalen Terry, if he were to stay in this draft, now he's testing the waters right now out of Arizona, but he has a lot of similarities to Herb Jones when you look at a guy who was more of like a defensive guy on that end of the floor, but then also like a playmaker with the ball, could really pass, not particularly a great shooter or scorer in the half court, but similar tools in terms of 6'7", 7'1" wingspan, kind of an infectious personality when you spend some time around him. So, he's a guy that I could see 1 or 2 teams being really enamored with, maybe envisioning a potential Herb Jones. Now we don't know if he's going to stay in the draft. If he doesn't, I think David Roddy out of Colorado State is one of the more interesting prospects. I've described him as if Grant Williams and Talen Horton-Tucker had a baby, that's him. That's Grant Williams, or that's David Roddy. So you can envision that, and then
it's an interesting visual.
Yeah, I know. He's got a bright future.
Okay, so we'll close with this question, and Bobby, I'll start with you. What's one thing that you'll be watching in the coming weeks?
Well, I think a lot of it will be who stays in, right? That's going to determine, what happens. A guy like, give you an example, Leonard Miller, who's kind of like the man of mystery, is going to play 5-on-5 here in Chicago. Does this kind of put him in the first round, or does he go back? Does he go to, commit to Arizona or Kentucky, or does he go to the G League here? And I think the next couple of days of the combine might elevate some player stock here.
Mike?
Shaden Sharp. No, I'm just kidding. I want to see, honestly, I'm getting a sense that a lot of guys are playing in the combine, like maybe even a little bit more than normal. Like Christian Brown, he's a national champion. He got the game-winning stop against North Carolina. Like he's made huge plays and he's going to play. And Jalen Williams, who I mentioned before, there are guys who are going to be playing 5-on-5 over the next couple of days. And so I'm just interested to see, who are the players who separate themselves, like a Leonard Millard. Ryan Rollins out of Toledo is another one. It's kind of a mid-major sleeper for some people. But again, Shaden Sharp, that's the biggest storyline here for me.
Jonathan.
It's the one and dones. It's the really young guys that are projected in the late first and in the second round. There are going to be a handful of them that crack the top 20, and it's going to start this week at the NBA Combine. It could be Terquavion Smith. It could be a Jaden Hardy, Trevor Keels, Max Christie, Patrick Baldwin. This is a really, really young draft, and there's just a lot of unknown around those guys. And NBA teams, they value them very, very differently. And so some teams have, Patrick Baldwin 15th on their board. Some have him 45th. And so I think it's going to be a draft night where we're like, wow, that guy went there, or that guy is still sliding like deep into the second round. And so that's going to be really interesting. Are any of those guys going to pull out of the draft at the deadline on June 1st also?
So the biggest question, what happens with Shaden Sharp? No, I'm just kidding. The NBA draft is on June 23rd on ESPN and ABC. Thanks, Bobby, Jonathan, Mike. I'm Christine Williamson. We'll see you guys next time.